Jessica? Oh, never mind. No, never mind. I'll email it back.
In the email, it said you'll get a text message, I believe, from
Members, oh, sorry. We are now live on YouTube.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to call this Audit and Risk Management Committee meeting to order. Quorum is present, and I'll begin with the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the land we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. Does anyone wish to declare a conflict of interest in accordance with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Okay, hearing none. The next item is the approval of the Audit and Risk Management Committee minutes of November 14th, 2023. I wasn't present at that meeting. Commissioner Osborne, were you at that meeting, and are you able to comment on the minutes?
Yes, I was at the meeting and I read the minutes, and if it's okay with just one person, I'll move it.
Great, you're all we've got. Are you in favor? Yes, okay.
Yes.
For motion, that's great. We're approving the minutes. All right, committee members, before we begin, I'd like to remind you that this is a hybrid meeting of the TTC Audit and Risk Management Committee. It's an open meeting being live streamed to the TTC YouTube channel. If you wish to submit a motion on an item, please email your motion to the email address that you've been provided with. And Chrisanne, maybe you can, I can just send things to you from here, I presume?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Now commence with the review of the audit paper. And I gotta go back to the audit paper. Sorry, to the audit paper. Thanks. So we have some presentations. And right, so the first item is the audit plan status update. There's going to be, I'll hold this as there's a staff presentation on this item. The second item is an audit risk and compliance enterprise risk update, and I'll hold this for a presentation from our CEO, Rick Leary. The next item is the executive compliance certificates update. Does anyone want to hold this item? If none, Commissioner Osborne, would you like to move those recommendations?
So moved.
Okay, all in favor?
Also in favor.
Excellent. Okay, that concludes the review of the order paper. So item 1 is the audit risk and compliance audit plan status update. There are presentations from this item on fair evasion and fair compliance, and I'm going to invite our CEO to speak on them. I guess we'll start with that. All right, Mr. Leary.
Thank you very much, through the chair. Commissioners, as you know, fair revenue and fair compliance really are critical to sustaining a reliable transit system here in Toronto. Now, they'll tell you that the TTC is committed to maximizing its fair revenue through ridership recovery, as well as fair compliance. While fair evasion existed before COVID, the increased rates since COVID have been unprecedented. And I would make mention that we were very fortunate during COVID, we did have the ability to collect fares at rear doors, unlike most transit systems that I'm aware of. Now, the TTC is not alone in this. Many transit authorities are experiencing high fare evasion rates. And most recently, it's been reported in New York that their bus fare evasion is at about 40%. I can let you know also that when I was in New York last spring with the previous chair, we had a good discussion with the MTA CEO, Gino Lieber, regarding safety, security, and fare evasion. Fare evasion increases really is critical to many in the transit systems, and it's being seen on a rise right across North America. Now, fare evasion not only impacts revenue streams, but it also undermines our system's integrity and compromises customer experience. Employees at all levels are confronting this challenge head-on and exploring effective strategies to combat fare evasion. And given the importance of ensuring that our services remain sustainable and accessible to all, we must maintain a fair and equitable fare collection system that upholds the principles of accountability and transparency. While we recognize that there are many, that there may be many various reasons why individuals resort to fare evasion, we must find solutions that address these underlying issues while still holding individuals accountable for their actions. We must also engage our communities to foster an understanding and cooperation. Education and outreach initiatives can play a significant role in raising awareness about the impact of fare evasion and encouraging compliance with our fare policies. I would say, Commissioners, that I'm proud of the team's dedication and their hard work as we continue to innovate and implement new technologies and procedures to deter fare evasion. From increased fare inspections, we have to get back to changing the culture of paying their fares, to the deployment of Presto systems. We're committed to finding a comprehensive solutions to strike that real balance between enforcement and customer experience. To help our efforts, I've asked the audit risk and compliance team to determine a new fare evasion baseline, and they've conducted a thorough review of our transit system. And much of this, I would say, has been a parallel effort, excuse my language, a parallel effort to what we presented to the board in February when we outlined a fare evasion program. Today we're going to share their findings and recommendations, building upon both their last and the AG's past evasion studies, and providing us with insights that will guide our continued efforts to address issues effectively. So I'll turn it over to you, Viraj. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. So I'll do a little, I'll say a few words before we get into the presentation in specific from an audit risk and compliance point of view. So as Rick appropriately mentioned, that we were asked to conduct this fare evasion review at his request to do a bit of a rebaseline compared to the 2019 study that we had done previously. We also have identified some potential improvements as part of this review. The fare evasion rates are higher compared to what we saw back in 2019. And as Rick has already pointed, other agencies are also seeing a similar trend. Audit risk and compliance has asked management for a strategy to be developed to be able to tackle this problem holistically. It should be noted that management is taking action to tackle this challenge, and we've received good support from management in conducting this review. Some actions are already underway, with some commencing shortly, which management will cover as part of their fare compliance strategy presentation. So with all of those said, I think we can move to the presentation. My colleague Victor here and I will walk you through the study results and observations. Okay. In terms of the agenda, we wanted to cover a few things. One is to give you a little bit of a history on the fare evasion study itself. We'll touch upon kind of an overview and methodology at a fairly high level. We'll get into the results of what we found in terms of the metrics and things of that nature. Then we'll get into the observations piece of it, which will be a bit more qualitative. And then we'll segue to management, as management has a response pertaining to this as well, and then we'll eventually do our question and answers as part of this process. If I can ask that we hold the question and answers, because you may find that some of the questions that may be raised may actually get answered between both presentations. Okay. The Fair Evasion Study History. Back in 2018, the Auditor General conducted their Fair Evasion study. This had an exposure of just over 60 million with an overall fair evasion rate of 5.4%. On the heels of that, our Audit Risk and Compliance Group conducted a capping behavior study in 2019 to really assess customer behavior. Right? That was part of the thought process that went into forming the ARC's Fair Evasion study in 2019. That study had an overall result or exposure of just over 70 million with a rate of 5.7%. A number of recommendations were provided to management in this regard. Once that study was concluded, we hit the COVID-19 pandemic, and many of the initiatives that were started were hindered by this process. For example, some pausing on enforcement. The TFIs were redeployed to do some customer service. But then ticketing, we found for fair evasion, commenced in March of 23. That kind of segued rather nicely into our fair evasion study, which, as I mentioned before, was a CEO request to complete that baseline study. Fair evasion in the news. So, as you can see on this slide, there appears to be several other transit agencies that are struggling with this challenge as well. Metrolinx, Montreal, Ottawa, London, and New York City. The MTA, which manages kind of the New York element, had a $700 million loss in 2023 due to fare and toll evasion. So I think that sets the kind of the environmental effects and will act as a good indicator in terms of our results that we'll discuss here today. In terms of the methodology, the 2023 methodology we used for the fair evasion study is consistent with the 2018 AG approach and the 2019 studies that we had performed previously. This was done to allow for comparability and trending. You'll notice that there were over 25,000 observations or samples that were completed, and we did that through using plainclothes transit fare inspectors. So during our field work as part of this 2023 fair evasion study, it became apparent that partial cash fares in the fare box was another source of revenue loss. This was not looked at in 2018 by the AG or our 2019 study, but in 2023, there was enough data that was compiled to determine its impact. In terms of scope limitations, we did not assess customer entries through bus bays or look at Wheel-Trans or the Blue Knight bus network. This is consistent with the prior studies as well. So the study observations have been kind of divided into these 6 themes. We will start with the financial results, and we'll cover the other themes, which will be more qualitative. As you can see, the overall revenue loss due to fare evasion is at 123.8 million. This can be compared to the 70.3 million in our 2019 study. The fare evasion rate is 11.9%, and that can be compared to 5.7% in 2019, which is approximately double the rate relative to the pre-pandemic fare evasion rates. We've also broken out the fare evasion component by the various modes. So for streetcar, we've noticed that the fare evasion rate is 29.6% with a financial exposure of 30.2 million. This is compared to a rate of 15.9% in 2019 and $23 million of an exposure back then. Streetcar has the highest fare evasion rate. Stations had a rate of 6.3% and a financial exposure of 26.5 million, versus the rate in 2019, which was 2.4% and an exposure of 12.9 million.
Can I ask you to clarify what you mean by stations?
Stations are subway stations.
So only subway, so because I actually asked that question to myself when I saw the notes, why didn't you call it subway then?
Oh, sorry.
I'm just curious because I wondered if stations is capturing something else. I'm not being smart here.
It is our subway kind
Okay.
of network.
Okay, thank you.
And then there's bus. The bus had a fare evasion rate of 12.9% with a financial exposure of 67.1 million versus a rate of 6.3% and an exposure of 33.4 million back in 2019. Bus does have the highest fare evasion exposure in terms of dollars. Now I'll pass it over to my colleague Victor to continue with this presentation.
So thank you, Viraj. We've prepared several short videos to help illustrate how fare evasion occurs at the TTC. I would also like to note that although I've selected certain streetcars and bus routes, as well as stations, these aren't particularly areas that are the most prevalent for fare evasion. They just help to illustrate how this would occur across the organization. In this video was taken on the 510 Spadina streetcar. As you can see, 7 people board the streetcar vehicle at door 2. And of these 7 people, 3 did not tap. These 3 individuals are highlighted by the red arrows. This video was taken from York Mills Station at the main entrance, and it illustrates how an individual could avoid paying a fare using the crash gates. The crash gates are adjacent to the fare box, which is highlighted by the orange arrow in this video. As you can see, the person walks directly past the fare box, does not deposit cash or legacy fare, nor do they present a legacy transfer to the collector, which is denoted, who is denoted in by the yellow arrow. Another notable thing within this, another notable item in this video is the minimal deterrent impact that the collector had on this particular individual. This video was taken from Dufferin Station at the east secondary entrance, and we can see that this individual runs and jumps over the fare gate. This video was taken from Victoria Park, Teesdale secondary entrance. And as you can see, this individual squeezes through the fence and the wall along the fare line. This video was also taken from Victoria Park, Teesdale secondary entrance, and you can see this individual breaking through the gate. This video was taken from Islington at the Islington station at the main entrance, and it illustrates how an individual can tailgate. Tailgating is an instance where you would walk behind an individual who had paid a fare. So here in this video to the far right, you can see a person in a black shirt tap their Presto card and the gates open. Closely followed by them is another individual who did not tap and avoided paying a fare. This video was taken from a bus outside of a high school bus stop. The red arrow denotes a Presto reader. And as you can see, 20 people board this vehicle and only one person has tapped. This video was from the same vehicle at the same time at the rear doors. And as you can see, similar to the front door, 7 people had entered and no one had tapped. I would also like to note that at the beginning of the video, you see that the rear doors are opened by the operator. This is not aligned with current front door boarding policy on buses. And this is likely done or initiated by the operator to help facilitate the flow of customers and to speed up the onboarding process. On this slide, I present the streetcar fare evasion by door based on our 2019 and 2023 fare evasion study. The 2019 results are denoted in green, and the 2023 results are denoted in red. What I would like to highlight on this slide is as we progress from door 1 to door 4, fare evasion rate increases regardless of the study. In addition to that, at each individual door, fare evasion had significantly increased from 2019. Similar to streetcars, buses, the rear doors on buses have a higher fare evasion rate. During our study, it was observed that the front doors had a fare evasion rate of 10% and the rear doors had a fare evasion rate of 52%. Within stations, there's a substantial difference between the fare evasion rate between the fare line and the crash gates. The fare line is considered the fare gates at the main and secondary entrances, as well as the surrounding fences. So at the fare line, the fare evasion rate was observed to be 3.2%, with an estimated annual revenue loss of $12.3 million. At the crash gate, it was observed that the fare evasion rate was 44.3%, with an estimated $14.2 million in annual revenue loss. Almost all children that appeared 12 and under did not use a child card. These children were able to access the TTC without any physical barriers of entry. So, for example, they were in stations, they were able to enter through the crash gates, and on buses and streetcar, they simply just boarded the vehicle. Children were also observed rarely traveling with a paying guardian as well. We noted that there has been an 84% reduction in the amount of child cards used. This coincides with the implementation of the visual and audible indicator of the child cards. However, through our study, we observed that there is still a 94% fraudulent use of child cards. So in other words, if there were 20 child cards being used, only one of them would have been used by an actual child. On this slide, on this graph, I show the fare evasion rate by time of day as well as by mode. Streetcar is denoted in orange, bus is denoted in red, and stations in green. The overall fare evasion rate is denoted in blue. What is most notable here is the streetcars, which has its fare evasion rate progressively increasing as the day progresses. I would also like to note that although the late evening has the highest fare evasion rate, the AM and the PM peaks have the highest financial impact due to the volume of customers. So that concludes the results of our 2023 fare evasion study. All of the financial numbers that I've provided previously could be compared to our 2018 and 2019 fare evasion studies. As Raj had previously mentioned, we were able to collect a sufficient amount of data to support an analysis on the partial fares, the impact of partial fares. And this was not done in 2018 or in 2019. So overall, we estimate that the TTC loses $17.1 million in revenue loss due to customers depositing a partial cash fare in the fare box. $9.1 million is attributed to fare boxes on buses, and $8 million is attributed to fare boxes in stations. So to help summarize, I know I've presented a lot of financial numbers. So on this slide, we have compiled both the fare evasion study as well as the partial fare analysis. And overall, we estimate that the TTC loses $140.9 million annually due to fare evasion. On this slide, I've further dissected these amounts into the modes. And if I can draw your attention to the bottom of the slide, there are financial numbers denoted in different colors. The numbers that are green relate to our fare evasion study, and the financial numbers in orange relate to our partial fare analysis. So that concludes our financial results. I'll now transition to discussing some of the qualitative observations that we've found throughout this study. So only TFIs enforce fares. Operators and collectors historically have had a shared responsibility to inspect and enforce fares as customers boarded a vehicle or entered a station. What this meant was at that time, at every entry, there was some form of fare enforcement or a physical barrier preventing a customer from entering the TTC without paying. In 2014, with the introduction of the low-floor streetcar, streetcar operators were isolated in their booths and were no longer present to the customers. And so therefore, they were not able to physically inspect fares. In addition to that, in 2015, bus operators and collectors were instructed to not inspect fares to enhance their safety. This was due to an increase in operator assaults during the time. Instead, operators and collectors were instructed to collect fares, educate customers, and report instances of fare evasion. This shifted the primary responsibility of fare enforcement to the transit fare inspectors. I would also like to note that with the introduction of lines 5 and 6, both these lines will function very similarly to streetcars. However, the major difference here is that customers must pay prior to boarding on lines 5 and 6, and there's no current mechanism to pay while on board. We suspect that lines 5 and 6 will also be difficult to manage for fare evasion. Fare enforcement only occurs on select modes. So transit fare inspectors are regularly deployed on streetcars and select stations. However, they are not deployed and they do not perform inspections on buses, on bus bays, and in subways. The current TTC policy states that proof of payment may be requested when transferring between different modes and vehicles. There could be an instance where an individual does not intend on transferring and therefore does not obtain a proof of payment. This makes inspections for transit fare inspectors quite difficult. This concern does not extend to streetcars because streetcars are a proof of payment route, and so inspections can be easily performed. During the COVID-19 pandemic, fare enforcement was suspended, and in March of 2023, ticketing had resumed. The absence of fare enforcement likely led to an increase in fare evasion. Prior to COVID, transit fare inspectors applied an educational approach to fare enforcement. What this means is they preferred to provide education and allowed customers to pay their fares as opposed to issuing them a ticket when encountering a customer who had not paid. However, what we've seen is likely a shift in customer behavior because 50% of customers who do not pay choose to pay after being inspected. TFIs have also expressed hesitation to enforce fares, and this could be due to numerous reasons. So as an example, There has been an increase or a volume of fare inspectors and special constable complaints, and these complaints take a long duration to resolve. The TTC bylaw is quite complex, and so transit fare inspectors are issuing tickets under varying bylaw sections and varying fine amounts. And lastly, there's a sense of low morale and a general need of increased management support. So since the conclusion of our fare evasion study, we're aware that management has completed several initiatives to remedy these concerns. So for example, management has hosted town halls where they have educated transit fare inspectors on the role of the fare inspectors and special constables complaints group, as well as reinforced management support for fare enforcement. The TTC's infrastructure and technology also contributes to fare evasion. As previously discussed, crash gates are a significant source of fare evasion, and it's estimated that they contribute $22.2 million to annual revenue loss. $14.2 million of this is attributed to customers who use the crash gates but do not pay. $8 million of this is attributed to customers who use the crash gate but only pay a partial fare. Crash gates are still required as TTC policy still accepts legacy fare media. It is our understanding that collaboration with Presto is required in order to develop a solution. Customers were also observed only paying a partial fare in the fare box without any consequence. Partial fares are particularly difficult to inspect because the flaps within the fare box have either been removed or are not actively being used. In stations in particular, the flaps in the fare box have been removed, which coincides with the introduction of the role of the customer service agent. This is because customer service agents are typically outside of their booth and unable to monitor the fare box. And so to prevent an instance where deposited funds in the fare box would overaccumulate, the flaps have been removed. So again, partial fares contribute to, or is estimated to contribute to $17.1 million annually in revenue loss. And management is currently assessing the use of a registered fare box as a possible solution. In stations, tailgating and breaking through the gates account for 33% of all fare evasion, and it's estimated that this has led to an 8.6 annual revenue loss. Rear doors on vehicles have a higher fare evasion rate than the front doors. On buses, there is a front door boarding policy. However, during the pandemic, we temporarily implemented an all-door boarding policy to help facilitate social distancing. This may have increased fare evasion as well. On streetcar, there is an all-door boarding policy and no operator is present, which is likely why fare evasion on streetcar, or fare evasion rate on streetcar, is the greatest amongst the three modes. Customers were observed regularly misusing legacy transfers due to its complexities. Frequently, customers would use the legacy transfers similar to a 2-hour unlimited travel transfer that the Presto offers. Additionally, there are 5 visually distinct looking legacy transfers that add to its complexity as well. There are 8 types of vending and payment machines, each vary in its appearance, acceptable forms of payment, as well as transfers that they dispense. And customers were observed having a hard time understanding how to use these machines. In our 2023 fare evasion study, we did not inspect individuals that entered through the bus bays to avoid paying of fares. However, I would like to highlight the safety risks that is present here, because these individuals are walking through areas where buses are active and they are more susceptible to being hit. In our research, we have also found studies and anecdotal evidence that suggests that there could be a potential correlation between fare evasion and security incidences. Although we did not specifically perform any analysis, management may want to compile data in order to assess any potential relationships. A more notable and recent example is in New York City, where they have deployed the National Guard within the subway systems for enhanced security and inspections. Transit fare inspectors can issue fare evasion tickets under various sections in the bylaw, each carrying different fine amounts. From March 2023 to December 2023, 1,153 fare-related provincial offense notices and summons were issued under 9 different bylaw sections. Of these tickets, 73% were issued for $235, and 27% was issued for $425. I would also like to note that the fines for $425 are typically reserved for more fraudulent cases, such as the misuse of a child card. The TTC bylaw was written during a time when Presto was not implemented, and as such requires revision in order to align with current fare policy. I had previously shown a video where high school students boarded a bus and did not pay a fare. What is particularly challenging with this demographic are the age-related legal restrictions, the TTC's appetite to enforce fares on youths, and the youth's general behavior towards being inspected. Youths under the age of 16 cannot be issued a provincial offense notice and can only be given a summons to court. Summons to court are typically used for exceptional cases, and parental notification is also required when issuing a summons to court to a youth as well. Youths under 16 are also not required to carry identification while traveling on the TTC, and it was observed that these individuals would commonly lie about their age to avoid having to pay or provide a proof of payment. In a previous slide, I had discussed the success of the implementation of the distinct and audible visual indicators of the child card. This concession was previously abused because it was free and obtainable. At the TTC, we currently have other free concessions that do not have a visual and distinct indicator. And for an example, those are the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, the Support Person Assistance Card, the TTC, and non-revenue concessions as well. Similar to the child card, the Canadian National Institute for the Blind and the Support Person's Assistance Card are managed by third parties and could be more difficult to manage. Transit fare inspectors decide when to provide can decide whether to provide education or to ticket a customer who has not paid. Although some level of decision-making is appropriate, if there are inconsistency in fare enforcement between the transit fare inspectors, this could potentially lead to inequities. However, we are aware that management has implemented a new inspection device. Within this device is an added functionality called the mobile ticketing, which is currently being piloted. What this allows TFIs or transit fare inspectors to do is leverage data on past fare enforcement infractions or offenses in order to decide whether to educate or ticket a customer. So overall, we suspect with this implementation, fare enforcement would be much more consistent. Transit fare inspectors can also decide which bylaw to charge their tickets against. The selection of the bylaw also determines how much a fine would be. So again, that's between $235 and $425. management is currently assessing the fine structure as well as the TTC bylaw number 1. The TTC offers several discounts through the use of concessions. So that, for example, that could be youth, senior, post-secondary, or even the child card. We also offer the Fair Pass program, which is run through the City of Toronto. Although we did not explicitly review or assess the motivations of customers who do not pay, it is fair to assume that some of these individuals do so out due to financial necessity. These individuals may be eligible for discounted fares or concessions, but have not been properly educated or informed. We are aware that management has developed a fair compliance marketing campaign, which is believed to be released next week. And within this campaign, there is mention and education on the use of the Fair Pass. Legacy transfers are much more restrictive and difficult to understand than the Presto 2-hour transfer. The Presto 2-hour transfer is available to customers who use a Presto ticket, Presto card, or debit and credit. Presto tickets and Presto cards are exclusively sold at Shoppers Drug Mart and within stations. However, only 3 of our 75 stations are located within neighborhood improvement areas. Individuals that live in neighborhood improvement areas that are not in close proximity to a Shoppers Drug Mart or a subway station may be restricted by the rules set out within the legacy transfers. So that concludes the observations for our 2023 fare evasion study. To date, there have been 3 fare evasion studies conducted at the 3 recent fare evasion studies that have been completed at the TTC, and those were completed in 2018, 2019, and 2023. In addition to that, we're aware that other transit agencies have also completed similar fare evasion studies. So it's our recommendation to management that they leverage the information available within these studies to develop a comprehensive fare evasion reduction strategy with considerations of using internal working groups, as well as measuring the impact of various fare evasion initiatives and the monitoring and reporting of fare evasion. So thank you everyone today. That concludes our 2023 fare evasion study. I would like to now pass it to management, who will be providing responses to our findings.
Okay, thank you, Victor. And good morning, Chair Sachs, Commissioner Osborne, and members of the public who've joined us. So as our CEO noted, fare evasion erodes our passenger revenue, which is one of our 2 critical funding sources, and therefore limits TTC's ability to sustain and reinvest in our service and maximize those benefits that transit accrues to both its riders and the community at large. At our last board meeting, staff outlined a series of actions that we have been undertaking as a means to improve fare compliance, because we know that our fare revenue is critical to sustaining, improving, and growing our system. As already has been highlighted, those actions also include the CEO's request to establish a new fare evasion rate baseline post-COVID, from which we could develop a comprehensive strategy and enable us to monitor our efforts and track our results. So in response to that study, my colleague Angela Gibson and I will be presenting TTC's fare compliance strategy that provides a backdrop to our current fare compliance efforts, highlighting the factors and their timeline that have shaped those efforts, provide an overview of our fare compliance strategy and the focused efforts so far, and lays out our overall priority actions and timing. Next slide, please. So fare compliance efforts are shared amongst various groups at the TTC, with each of us playing a role. So as you heard today, our audit risk and compliance colleagues have established not only 1, but 2 fare evasion baseline studies and has provided advice. In finance, we identify the revenue targets, we do analysis, we do the monitoring and the reporting. Our revenue protection group, headed by Angela Gibson, is responsible for streetcar deployment, strategies, education, and fare inspection. Our colleagues in our fare card team and our revenue operations ensure that we have the equipment that's required and manage the data coming from our fare gate. And increasingly, our colleagues in stations continue to provide presence in those locations to ensure that they're not only there for customer service, but also acting as a deterrent and helping to manage the riders going through the system. Next slide, please. So there are various key factors that have shaped or impacted our approach to fare compliance. So we've seen over time that the TTC has adjusted to vehicle modernization, which has seen a change in the design of our streetcars and our buses. We've also had managed a new fare collection system, and with that modernization was the introduction of Presto technology that was being applied to our existing fare structure and concessions. With station transformation, we had a focus on customer service and safety in our stations and rethinking about how we deliver that. And at the same time, we've had the need to address safety, whether it's been with our operators directly or through COVID, as well as the most latest in our community safety, security, and well-being program. And finally, we've been undertaking culture change to ensure equitable, transparent, and accountable approach to our fare enforcement and security. Next slide, please. So some of those key factors are highlighted here over a timeline. And as we see, starting with pre-2015, what we had essentially was the design and the award of new streetcars much around and before 2009 that saw the separation of our operators from our customers. And with that came the need for proof of payment inspection. The operators no longer were enforcing fares, and all-door boarding was introduced to relieve congestion. At the same time, bus operators were no longer being made responsible for fare enforcement to address safety concerns as they were seeing increased assaults. And also during that time period, that's when the Presto card was launched and new fare gates were replaced with turnstiles. Shortly after that, we saw new concessions being introduced, whether it was the 2-hour transfer or children riding free, and with that, more movement through the system. At that time as well, Presto started to reach 90%, and in the same period of time, we saw the first Auditor General fare evasion audit that identified in 2018, followed by the ARC fare evasion study in 2019, and also, most importantly, as it related to our fare inspection function, the Ombudsman's report around special constables and fare inspectors that began our work on culture change. Of course, in 2020, COVID hit, and our focus was on making adjustments to address COVID safety protocols. And so we saw a temporary release of temporary rear door boarding to ensure physical distancing, bringing in barriers to protect our operators, and pausing inspections during that period. Meanwhile, we were addressing some of the Presto issues, and we brought in, as you've heard, about the audible sound for the Presto card to deal with those issues, and also reached agreement with Presto. However, there are still some deliverables that have been unmet and we are about to continue to address. Inspection started to resume, but we took an education approach. And in the meantime, we also had our station transformation going. Through that period, that continued. And then in 2022, as we heard more about the safety issues in the system, our 50% of our fare inspectors were deployed to stations to help address some of those concerns. And finally, as we reached 2023, we resumed our ticketing and our off-board inspections. We've implemented some mobile devices. And once again, we've initiated this new baseline to resume our fare evasion efforts. And so now I'd like to turn the presentation over to my colleague, Angela Gibson, who will also provide a bit of an overview of how the fare inspection function has evolved specifically.
Thank you, Josie. So what you see here on this graph is our preliminary information on our fair inspection data. Inspections are the foundations of the work of our fair inspector. This graph shows the impact of the COVID pandemic on inspection operations and the move during that time to an educational approach. In response to the Ombudsman's 2017 and 2019 reports, the department had a major reset and implemented our culture change program. This pivotal work included anti-racism training, anti-unconscious bias training, confronting anti-Black racism, and Indigenous training. It also integrated new caution form and better race-based data collection. We've, in that time, also developed a use of discretion policy and a use of force policy, and we have the creation of a new complaints office. I also want to point out that when we resumed ticketing in late March of 2023, we initiated this TAPS over tickets program that was previously mentioned, which we only issued tickets for customers who refused to pay after being fair inspected. I also want to point out the blue area in this graph shows a change in the new devices that were onboarded in 2023 that allows us now to automate our inspection data and move away from self-reported data from the fair inspectors. It's also important to note that more than 50% of our current fair inspector staff were onboarded during the pandemic. Next slide, please. Next, I want to talk about our fair compliance strategy. Next slide, please. So what are we doing now? We have fair revenue protection is a strategy that's focused over to support our streetcar and key subway station locations, primarily in the downtown core. The strategy can be broken out in 4 categories that we are continuously evolving and growing. So let's start with people and staff and training. So some of the core work includes our educated approach, which was TAPS over tickets. As previously mentioned, we've done a number of town halls to ensure that our fair inspectors have clear expectations around their performance as well as their training to our customers. And we have ongoing coaching for our more junior staff. With respect to technology, we onboarded our new handheld point of sales devices in Q3 of 2023. We also initiated our mobile ticketing pilot that enables us to process tickets to customers almost immediately. So it means that we don't have to use handwritten tickets anymore. And then later on this year, in April, we presented to the board the body-worn camera pilot that will also serve to support the work of the fair inspectors in the field. Data is a very important part of this work. The new deployments that we'll be have been rolling out this week is really based on the most current ridership data that we have, and we're trying to align our fair inspection with where the ridership is. We've also, through data, we're creating a history of caution and ticketing data. And with respect to future planning, we're keeping an eye on the impacts of line 5 and 6 in terms of the new kind of fare collection model that will be rolled out on those lines. Next slide, please. Previously, we've shared with prior boards our streetcar deployment, and this looks similar, but actually this has been refined, and where you see our zones of where we have primary zones where we focus our attention where there is higher ridership. And then we are, through this deployment, what you'll find is that we are deploying our teams, larger teams, onto really high ridership routes. So all of these efforts are designed to maximize the workforce and ensure that we are aligning the schedule with the changes that we've seen in ridership since the pandemic and as ridership has grown late last year. So we know that we have high ridership zones and they've changed, and that's why this is what this deployment map shows. And we're expected to see an increase in our inspections as a result of this new deployment. Next slide, please. So in addition to the efforts that we're doing in revenue protection, there has been a lot of efforts that have been done within stations. So there's been an addition of 20 new station supervisors, 10 new operation supervisors, and 130 new customer service agents. The map here on the right outlines the new deployment strategy for stations. And to develop this strategy, this has been based on a data collection within our own research and analytics department. We focused on key areas such as overall passenger volumes, ridership numbers, fare evasion statistics, the numbers of safety complaints and offenses, and we've also added in their own operational requirements. All of our stations are now fully staffed from open to close with at least one station staff member. However, with this new addition of 130 customer service agents, we have been able to strategically deploy them to complement our existing staffing levels by providing coverage to an additional 37 secondary entrances across 33 stations, 7 days a week. Next slide, please. As mentioned by our colleagues in audit risk compliance, we will be beginning a new customer fare compliance campaign in the next following weeks. This campaign will also complement the work that we've been doing with education in the system. It will be put out there to support the deployment of our fare inspectors at critical locations where we're seeing high ridership, and support the larger teams that are going to be inspecting at peak hours. It will also be supporting the work of our special constables who will be deployed in key bus routes in terms of what we found for fare evasion on those bus routes. Next slide, please.
So this final slide of our presentation lays out the priority actions and their timing that make up our strategy. You heard from my colleague that there have been actions that have been taken so far, and those that are imminent, like our education program, as well as the advanced deployment that we have. So those things include, of course, making sure that we have the staff capacity, the fare inspection efforts, the workshops that we undertook, as well as these last matter of things. It's really important to note is that our data-driven deployments are really intended to cover all our modes, so the fare inspectors on our streetcars, the CSAs and station managers in our stations, and increasingly our special constables who we'll be also looking to deploy in our bus stations. There are a series of actions that many of which are underway that'll be delivered over the next year, and they include actions that are to address our fare collection and our technology, including dealing with our complexity of our legacy fares, our transfers and our vending machines, and these are actions that we'll be taking with our Presto partner. That will enable us to also look at our crash gates. We're engaging our frontline staff and the union to solicit any other ideas that management has not come forward with, and that's something that is imminent as well. We'll be evaluating our key policy decisions around proof of payment and all-door boarding to ensure that we understand those in relation to the service that's being provided, as well as the costs associated with that expansion. We'll be expanding our education with a focus on youth, and we'll be partnering with the city to address, to see whether we could expand the Fare Pass program as it was intended by the city to do so. As well, it's important that we'll also be looking at our fine structure to ensure that there's equity and to work on whether there are options around a more efficient delivery of that. And finally and foremostly, we'll also be monitoring our changes and tracking our results. In summary, we believe that these actions will address the findings and observations of our ARC study and be able to provide us with the necessary tools available to us to reduce our fare evasion and increase our fare compliance. Thank you.
Okay, is that the end of the staff presentation? Hello?
Yes, Chair, and through you, that ends our presentation.
Thank you. Commissioner Osborne, do you have any questions for staff?
Likely not a large surprise. I do have some questions, and I'm probably not going to get through them all, so we can rotate this through. My first question was actually answered in your presentation. But so you said that you don't know why it is, why people are stealing transit, I'll just call it that. You did acknowledge that some of it is due to inability to pay. I would love to know what percent that is. My guess is it's a lot smaller than it should be as a percent. I don't think that inability to pay excuses stealing transit because, as we've all discussed, that there are other options for people. However, I am wondering if at some point we might consider finding out why it's okay to steal transit. Like, why is it that lots of people that I know who have lots of money tell me that their kids never pay for transit? And where they would never steal something from the grocery store or... So anyway, so I guess that's my first question.
I think there are various elements to this, Commissioner. When we look at folks that do not pay, they fall into, I think, a number of different categories.
Sorry, can you speak up just a bit?
Let me just pull this forward. Okay. I think there's a number of reasons because when we look at folks that do not, or customers that do not pay, they're not all created equal, right? So there are almost categories of folks, if you want to look at it that way, of folks that may not pay. Such as, for example, you have a group that could be classified as more opportunistic. You could have folks that through, as you mentioned, where there could be kind of challenges in terms of affordability and things of that nature. So I think with some of the strategies that do need to come up, I think it needs to be almost aligned to that effect. But with folks that are actually looking in terms of the payments, there are programs that need that can be done to get them that coverage, such as, for example, the Fare Pass program for folks that may not be able to afford it, to be able to kind of sync that, right?
So for me, it's just getting more certainty around this. Everybody knows there's lots of reasons why this is happening, but I would say that we're now in full-on crisis on this. And I think it will help guide some of the responses and the messaging on those responses if we have a better handle on the fact that we're not just picking on poor people. I just simply refuse to believe that that is the situation here. And I think the high school example illustrates that. And I'm not going to name any high schools, but I would suggest there are a few you could go and very safely not worry about picking on people who are financially challenged and find a lot of people who are not paying for their fares. Anyway, it's something you might want to consider.
If I can just say one thing, Commissioner, if that's okay. We know that there are folks that fall within that opportunistic bucket, because if we look at some of the historical work that's been done, where the fare inspectors kind of go out there, 50% of those folks that didn't tap end up tapping. So those are more on an opportunistic basis. So they're it goes to your point that you were making that, there are some people that can afford to pay it, but that are not, right? So I just wanted to kind of highlight that as part of.
And so then what do we have to say to them to make them understand that this is theft? That they are stealing something where they would never, probably, in many cases, feel inclined, is this viewed as not paying green P parking on the street? That there's no harm done? Again, it just may help make messaging more effective if we know why it's deemed to be okay. Okay, next question. Why are you not enforcing fare on buses?
I'll pass that on to management.
Through the chair, we're actually putting out special constables to ride the buses now like we did in years past to help reinforce for the operators the importance of paying fares. We're seeing this, the children, part of the program that we're putting together for the fall will be a significant outreach to youth regarding paying your fare. We do know, and I'll be very clear that, when part of your previous question, if I could, right? It's about culture change, and it's going to be about ticketing from now on. People, you go out to many of these areas, and I use this term over quite often. Many people are dressed just like me, and I watch them get on the streetcar and ride that period of time. And we've made it clear that tickets will be changing the culture of those that can afford to pay.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to hear that. How much ticketing is happening now? We got some numbers, but I'm just curious how aggressively we're now in the field, either ticketing or collecting.
Yes, so through the chair, this week we've begun with a new deployment that I showed where we're focusing our efforts in inspections and tickets with high ridership. So we're in cases, previously our deployment was really based on previous ridership from even before the pandemic. So now so if I look at like last week's numbers in terms of tickets, we're writing over about 100 tickets a week. And then about the same in cautions.
And is that over how many fare inspectors?
That's over, so we have about 100 fare inspectors. So
that's one ticket a week.
Yeah. So that was last week's numbers. We are increasing in terms of, we're expecting an increase with this new deployment that's been rolled out. So and with the campaign that we're going to be launching in the next number of weeks, we are expecting to see the tickets increase.
Okay, do we have targets? And I don't mean targets I know this is a very sensitive topic, but one ticket a week per fare inspector doesn't seem like good value for money. There may be some combination of some interaction so that there's some way that we can quantify the number of people who are, maybe there's one ticket or 10 tickets, whatever the number is, and a number of customers who had not paid who will then pay. Something that will, enable us to track the activity here.
Yeah. So what we don't have quotas for tickets. We do have minimums for inspections. And then as I said earlier, inspections are really the foundation. The more inspections that we're doing, we're driving down that message that, that there isn't a free fare. And so that's really what we focused on. And then we are expecting the increase of tickets as we increase our inspections on the system.
Through the chair, I'm going to jump in again if I could, because on the 18th or yesterday, when they put the new schedule in place, that means all the fare inspectors get better than 50% more time in the field. So although there was a chart and a graph here that showed you the actual inspections, that's going to go up significantly. And as of this week, it's no longer taps over tickets. We're giving tickets to people. This is about culture change for those that can't. So I'm really interested at the end of this week what the number of tickets comes out as well. And we'll be making sure that we put a plan together to report out to the board on a regular basis, the results of what's happening.
Okay, am I out of time? Okay, I cede the floor, but I'll be back.
Commissioner Sachs, you're muted.
Okay, try that again. Commissioner Osborne, please keep going. You're doing a great job, and I will wait till you're done.
Okay, you mentioned in the presentation that the fair inspectors were hesitant to enforce, and I didn't get an accurate description of the way that you described it. But it just seemed a bit dissonant in a way, because I would have expected that that is kind of why they were hired, that there would be no ambiguity around what their job was if they're fair inspectors, that we end up having them finding that it's awkward for them or uncomfortable, whatever the wording was, and my apologies for not expressing it accurately.
I think it's important to note, the study itself was done in terms of observations, April to July of 2023. And during that time, we had just resumed ticketing. 50% of our staff had just been onboarded throughout the pandemic. So ticketing was a new culture for them. Today, with all of our staff in place, they have the training. We've gone through extensive training, extensive town halls. We've got a lot of communication. In addition to that, we have our supervisors in the field with them, with our assistant managers, ensuring that they're very clear on expectations of inspections. They know exactly what to do for ticketing. In fact, we have even given examples of how we want our tickets to look like. We've worked with our prosecutors so that it's clear what they need in terms of to be able to deal with the tickets in the court system. So the training has gone in place today. And so we're confident that all of our fair inspectors know what to do and know their jobs.
And I'm wondering, just as an aside, if this relates to that other item where there was a lack of clarity required in some of the onboarding, that maybe this was a pretty good example of that. Okay. At one point, and I turned the corner here, you referred to security incident. Okay, I'll come back to that. I'll have to find that. So I'm just wondering, in the plan that we have going forward, if we have established any targets for either reduced incident percentages or revenue recovered, or if there's anything around what success looks like here moving forward and where we expect to land once whatever the programs are, once this gets fully fleshed out, where we want to be realistically.
So through the chair, thank you for that question. We have not established, if you're asking, a fair evasion revenue target at this stage. This work here, that particularly the work that's going to happen over the next few months in Q2, Q3, that's identified on page 11 of our presentation, is really the backbone, and we need to understand some of those elements and how well they're doing. So the deployment is a big piece. The ticketing is a big piece, because as we ticket, that's not revenue that comes to us, right? The fair revenue is when they actually tap. So that will take a while. We believe that by monitoring these improvements and adjusting, that we should be in a good place for the 2025 budget process to actually establish a financial target, but we will be monitoring and reporting as we go. We really do need to spend some time understanding the results here. So the answer is not at this point in time.
So we had a number of tactics in the, like the documents that you just shared, the report that you just shared. And I wouldn't describe it as fulsome. Like, I know there's stuff in there and I know but I'm just interested in what wasn't in the list of the stuff that either you're doing now or you're about to do. And I'm going to give what might be a bad example, but we had an image of the guy sliding through, he kind of goes this way through at the subway. That looks to me like a pretty easy fix. You just put a little wire up so that the guy can't get through there. So I don't know if there are certain things like that, physical things that aren't on your list. A bigger one is probably in the subway where the person is walking by somebody, so that we see that at the gates, it's a lower percent, although more money because it's more people. But, I'm just looking here to see if there are any areas that aren't on this list that were maybe considered and rejected, or if we need a larger list, I guess is what I'm saying.
I'll take this through the chair if I could describe it. Some of the questions that we've asked more recently, and Josie's working on with her staff, what are the differences at the turnstiles regarding having the CSAs at these 37 locations, right? And month over month, we're just taking a look at it and looking at it year over year. We're seeing some marginal changes. As for I've asked, Angela has been working with the operations group. We have a whole list of all the bus routes that bus operations tells us are the greatest challenges for them. And we're starting to rotate our special constables throughout those areas. Angela's also, I don't mean to speak for you, but Angela's also correlating all the locations with Virage and what's known for the backdoor issues that we have, right? And putting supervisors at those locations. We know operators open the back door primarily to let people off, right? And then people just crush on, because during COVID, people were allowed to tap. It was the only means of getting on a bus. So we're trying to address all these one-off areas. And that little slide through area with discussion in the station was a good example. List them all out and then report out back to the board on them.
Do we know how much money the misuse of child cards is costing us?
That's about, go through the chairs, about 1.5 million.
Okay. I'm wondering if I could make a request then when we start to look at, I'm assuming this is going to come to the board. This is, I'm actually stunned. This is not on the front page of the Toronto Star just from this report. Is we get some way of looking at the various parts of this, the physical, the fare evasion that is happening because of, the physical nature of the stations or the setup. And if we can get some numbers beside those, if we could have, instead of just percents, because again, the tapping at the fare gates is a perfect example. We've got a really high rate at the one where they sort of zoom through by the customer service representative in the station. But in terms of gross dollars, it's a lesser problem just because there's just less of it. So the percent is in a way misleading, so that we can look at a way that, across maybe some kind of gridding or something, that we can identify the extent to which there is any low-hanging fruit here, and maybe go after a few of the, in quotes, easier wins, so that we can have some, I don't know, just maybe a more comprehensive way of looking at the ways that we can attack this. I think that might be it for me for now, Diane.
There we go. All right. Well, I would be happy then to take our lunch break now, because I have quite a few questions, and over lunch I can organize them a little bit better. So we'll adjourn now for 45 minutes. We'll come back then, and in the meantime, Commissioner Osborne and I will consolidate what we're going to do next. All right. Thanks very much, everybody. See you in 45 minutes.
Is it usually?
Usually we just go straight because
What?
Members, we are now back in public session, or back, sorry, on YouTube, I should say, live.
Thank you very much. Before we return to fair evasion, Rick, did you want to say a couple of brief words about item 2? Sorry, Mr. Leary?
I can defer that at this time.
Okay. All right. Do any committee members have questions on this item? Well, hearing none, I request anyone willing to make a motion to adopt the staff recommendations.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So that item is approved. Thank you very much. Remarkably efficient. Thank you for the hard work on it. It certainly was helpful, I thought, to see the attention the staff have been paying to what are the greatest risks. Admittedly, the biggest ones are things we don't control, but it's always know which order to have our nightmares in. So going back to the fair evasion item. So I did want to compliment staff on the thoroughness of the study. It certainly identifies a large number of problems, many of which are, in a sense, self-inflicted, the results of decisions that the TTC has made over time, and which therefore, at least in some cases, we could make different decisions. But I did want to start with one that isn't clearly under our control, which is lines 5 and 6. What I heard was that there is going to be a very substantial risk of high levels of fare evasion on those 2 lines because people are not going to, because there's a different method of expecting people to pay that people are not going to be familiar with, that there's no way to pay online, on board. So my first question is, have you had this discussion with Metrolinx, and what is your proposal to keep this risk from ballooning?
Through the chair, yes, we have been working with Metrolinx and their partners at Presto to work on many different avenues so that we can address this. So the first is looking at ensuring that we provide our customers on that line with the ability to pay. So in partnership, and it was before the board last year, we partnered with Metrolinx to put out full-service vending machines at every stop, and there are also additional vending machines within the stations on line 5 and 6. And this is so that our customers would be able to have access to have a ticket and also add money to their Presto card. So we wanted to make sure that, first of all, that there was an ability to pay at these stations. So we've increased that accessibility. In addition, we will be working with them once we do go online with these, we do start to commission these lines to ensure that we've done an educational process on this so that our customers are fully aware of the new method to pay. And in addition, we have fare inspectors that have been, that we have onboarded that would be supporting these 2 lines, in addition to special constables.
But even with that, you're still expecting a significant problem with fare evasion on these 2 lines, correct?
If I could, through the chair, it's Rick. Let me just tell you the difference between this and what we had before. Existing system, we have equipment on board vehicles. It makes it complicated for people, as we know. Now that it's going to be on the platform, we are going to go heavier initially to make sure that people have an understanding when you're on, because you will be ticketed. We have to be clear to people, it's establishing a culture right off the bat. About 5, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, Councillor Carroll made a good statement to us. If we had gone heavy at the beginning to make sure we changed the culture originally, right, we may not have put ourselves in that state. And so that's the intent. We want to go heavy originally to set that culture right away.
Why is there no way to tap on the onboard? I mean, I guess the short answer is Metrolinx didn't want it, but is it possible to add it? Have you discussed with them the fare evasion consequences of not having a way to pay on board?
It's not possible to add it. The vehicles themselves are new vehicles. They're not like our streetcar. There's not an area on the vehicle that we could do that. So the design of the vehicle prohibits that from happening.
Does Metrolinx have any financial consequences if people don't pay?
No, through the chair, no, there's no financial consequences with people don't pay. But I mean, this is why, as the operator of those lines, we are ensuring that we are going heavy on the fare inspections. We're going to have dedicated fare inspectors on these lines. And we're going to have a big advertising and educational campaign to ensure that those folks that are using this line do know how it's going to be operated.
Yeah, I wish we'd known that when we were debating at council the approval of the operating agreement, because this information wasn't brought to us.
It's also a different system, if I could add, Commissioner. There's 25 stations, 10 of them are underground, 15 of them are stations at the surface area, all right, where you can install equipment. It's more typical in the industry. But, in our streetcar network, we don't have places to put them on the street. If you can just picture going on King and Queen, so many locations. And that's why it was put on the vehicle.
Okay, so you're going to be keeping close tabs on it and keeping us informed if and when these lines open, right?
Absolutely, Chair.
Chair, can I just ask a question to clarify something that you just asked?
Of course.
Is it not true that Metrolinx does have some skin in this game because they take a share of, they take 10% of through Presto, they take 10% of fare revenue?
So through, excuse me, through the chair, their only financial benefit would be the commission fees, which are currently at 5.9%.
5.9, right.
On line 5 and line 6, the issue is that all fare and non-fare revenue come to us.
Us, right. Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, the second thing is you mentioned the problem with, and again, Commissioner Osborne touched on this, that we don't require proof of payment everywhere. That's a rule set by the TTC. We could change that. Right?
Through the chair, that is true, Commissioner, but as Josie had mentioned during our initial presentation, prior to 2009 of the issuing of the streetcar vehicle, when they put the operator in the cab up front, no longer having the operator pay attention to fares, the intent was to go to proof of payment. We also know that when they went to proof of payment in 2014 or 2015, that the run times for moving vehicle along much faster. All right, significantly improved the travel for our customers. And then, we never expected to be here at this point, at this juncture. And then, so just to let you know that. But we've had this discussion about.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Please finish.
No, go right ahead.
My question was, the proof of payment rule is now limited, as we just heard, and that's causing problems. Why aren't you just asking us to change that rule now? And what is the reason for the delay in changing that rule?
Through the chair. So the question would be, if we ever tried to take a 4-door vehicle that's 99 feet long, right, and put it to pay on board and put a fare box at the front, even if we staffed it, the amount of people that would still have to get off on rear doors, right? If you can picture it, 147, 150 people when that thing's packed coming up through the rear door. The intent of a lot of the industry and throughout the 90s and beyond went to proof of payment. We'd like to get, I think someone asked the question earlier, if you could ever get down to the industry with expectation of 3 to 5%, recognizing not everybody could pay, that's what we have to do, is get back to an area like that. We've had people ask us.
Yeah, I think I wasn't clear with my question. I'm not suggesting you go back to not requiring proof of payment. My question is, we heard from your staff that it's difficult to do fare enforcement because proof of payment isn't required everywhere in the system. And you got it on this list as something you're going to think about for 2025. Why aren't we moving right now to requiring proof of payment throughout the system to facilitate fare enforcement? Why is there a delay?
Oh, okay, I apologize for misunderstanding that. The agreement with Presto is to have us eliminate that walkthrough area and stations, I believe in late '25, when the new contract is in place and they have the equipment. Once we have that locked off, like most transit systems, you would have to tap at every juncture coming in, and that allows us to have proof of payment throughout the entire network. Now, the one issue is you can picture transferring from King Street streetcar, for instance, and having to take a piece of paper today out of the machine is not having a Presto card. In the future, you'd get some type of Presto tap card that would allow you to do that. So we can't today. We're still waiting for the Presto system to provide that equipment. We would have loved to have done that years ago.
We can't require proof of payment on buses because of something to do with Presto? I don't understand. Why can't you require somebody on a bus to prove that they paid?
Through the chair. So in order for us to allow for someone to require proof of payment, we need to be able to ensure that they have, if they've used cash or legacy, that they get some sort of ticket that would then be able to say that we can inspect. So we are working on making some improvements, to modernize our whole fare collection. That is on the that's on the path or the roadmap that we have with Presto, and so and that's in progress. So we're working on getting that enablement so that we can start that.
I must be missing something here. Certainly, before we had Presto, whenever you paid your ticket or token, there was an opportunity to get a transfer which would prove that you paid. What is the problem with requiring that now?
You can require that now, but that's not, we haven't got for one, we don't have no requirement of proof of payment, and two, we would have to initiate that.
Wait, let's, my question was, again, in terms of self-inflicted problems, this is a rule that the TTC created and that we can change. So my question is, why don't we require proof of payment throughout the system? We heard from your fare evasion study that this is a current problem. So why don't we require proof of payment throughout the system?
Through the chair, sorry.
If this is not a question you can't answer now, then please get back to me. But it's an identified problem that sounds like an easy one to fix.
So we can get back to you in terms of the history of why there is not proof of payment throughout the whole system, and work with, and also get back to you on the roadmap of how we would get there.
Right. I'm not so interested in history. I want to know what our options are now, recognizing that it's a problem now. Okay, you'll get back to me. Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Similarly, why are we still accepting legacy and cash fares?
Through the chair, so the legacy, which is our TTC tickets and the TTC tokens, we have stopped selling that. We stopped selling TTC tickets in 2022, and we stopped selling TTC tokens in 2023. And the stop accepting of those fare media would be probably in line with when we start up line 5 and line 6, because we don't have the equipment to be able to accept those methods of payments on those two lines. So that's when we're anticipating retiring of those two fare media. There's no decision that the board has made with respect to cash, and so something that we'd be looking at, and then staff would be presenting back to the board to make a decision about what that would look like. Obviously, not accepting cash would have implications on an equity-based basis, so we need to look at that most comprehensively to ensure that we're not going to make it worse for people who are dependent on cash.
But you've identified, again, your study has identified that both the legacy media, well, actually, let me deal with them one at a time. The legacy fare media continues to be a problem, and it's one of the reasons that you've got the crash gates, which are leading to so much evasion. So you've just told me they can't be accepted on line 5 and 6, and isn't 5 opening this this year, in the next few months. So what is the plan for phasing out the legacy media, fare media, given its significance in contributing to fare evasion?
So through the chair, so to clarify, the phasing out of legacy fare media, which was identified in our presentation, refers to TTC tickets and tokens. Cash would still be accepted in the system. And there is a plan to retire that, so that the next stage of that would require advertising and education to our customers so that they know the timeline for when that we would no longer accept that fare media in the system. There's a longer, the work of removing cash in the system is a partnership with Presto, so we would have to work on some other initiatives with Presto so that we can make that happen. And that would have a longer timeline, and we would need to we could provide that timeline back to the board. In addition, when we are able to phase out legacy tickets and tokens, we would be able to also phase out a number of crash gates. And those are the crash gates at stations that are integrated with our bus network. We would be able to move forward with that. So there is a lot of work that can be done once we begin to phase out TTC tickets and tokens.
Right. With due respect, it will save time if you try to answer the questions I'm actually asking one at a time. I didn't ask you about cash. I was trying to do those separately. So let's get back to the legacy fare media, because I have this slide on my screen. That's why I'm asking about it. So we've been told, well, let me try again. When is line 5 opening, please?
Through the chair, there hasn't been a date established yet for the opening of line 5 and 6.
Well, 6 I know, but I thought we heard from you at our last board meeting that you were expecting line 5 to open in the next few months.
No, that we're still working with them as we put staff over there, but I apologize if I gave that impression.
Okay. When are you still expecting line 5 to open before line 6?
That still has to be determined as well. We're working with Metrolinx on that. They'll let us know the dates.
Is it at least clear that when you open line 5, legacy media will stop being acceptable?
Through the chair, that's correct.
All right. And then you'll be closing those crash gates, which are also contributing so much to the fare evasion problem, correct?
A portion of yes, that's what we've identified. 70% of the crash gates would be able to close.
And how long would it take after line 5 opens before those crash gates are closed?
I'd have to get back to you on that. So we have
Yes,
not, yes.
Yes, I mean, generally, as discussed with the CEO, I'm looking for a much more detailed plan with dates and a greater sense of urgency, given the enormous size of the problem that this is creating for the TTC. But then let's talk about cash. So you've identified a number of issues with cash, including having removed the flaps as making it impossible to tell whether people are paying correctly or not. Given that that's a problem, are you proposing to do anything this year to reduce the fare evasion problems associated with cash, and if so, what?
So we're doing a number of initiatives. One, we spoke about the registering fare box. That's a project that we have begun, and the work that we're doing that would ensure that when customers are paying their fare on bus, that we would know exactly how much they've paid, and that would eliminate that issue about partial fares. In addition, we are also, in order for us to be able to eliminate cash in the future, we'd have to ensure that we have greater accessibility of Presto fare media throughout all our neighborhoods. As you know, we have challenges for some of our customers to have access to pay to add money to their Presto fare or get a different kinds of fare media. And so our team is working with Metrolinx to expand the third-party network. We're also working with Metrolinx to do some better technology around the machine-readable transfer. So those are two additional initiatives that would help us reduce our dependency on cash.
What I heard was we've got interesting projects underway. What I didn't hear was that anything was going to change this year. Is anything going to change this year that's going to reduce fare evasion associated with cash?
Well, some things have already changed. Last year, we launched open payments, and we have seen substantial increase of cash-paying customers moving over to open payments. In addition, the work of the third-party network expanding that reach is something that we're expecting to see a wider reach for this year. So we're working with our partners at Metrolinx. So we're hoping that before the end of the year, we'll have some bigger expansion of that program.
Do we have an opportunity when you bring this fare evasion to the May TTC board meeting to also bring Presto so that they can answer questions about their timing on these issues?
Through the chair, yes, we'll bring our partners.
Okay, now let's go back to the flaps. We heard from your audit team that the flaps worsen the problem of fare evasion because they make it impossible to tell if someone has part paid cash, and for that matter, whether someone's torn a ticket in half and only put half a ticket in. Why are you not putting the flaps back?
I'll jump in. So, Commissioner, the CSAs that are at the station, along with the collectors, roam in the area. There, as you know, when you're out there, you see them assisting customers. They're not sitting at the booth 100% of the time watching that box anymore. And the boxes are old, I'll just be honest with you, right? The money was building up on top, right? So because they're around, it's a straight drop. It's just like the older buses. It's a straight drop dropping in. If someone's, I hate to say it, a handful of nickels or shy of the $3.35, right? They can go through. We really wait in 2025 when Presto gets the full program in to have a gate there that requires a tap. That's the key to this whole thing. Get that person there on the tap. We'll put multiple employees. You go to Union, for instance, we have multiple employees standing by that through gate, and it can be overwhelming.
So what I heard, I think, Mr. Leary, was that you're not planning to put the flaps back. You'd rather put up with the loss of revenue rather than put the flaps back. Did I hear that correctly?
No, what you're hearing is we prefer to have we have more staff that are at the gates now. Right? Like when you go to Union, you see multiple people at the gates to try to address it rather than getting pulled away. We're going to ask staff to take a look at that because this was relatively new information. I've asked staff to take a look at it, but we're also, as we mentioned at the board last month, looking at new boxes as well for multiple functions.
Well, new boxes would be great, but what I'm looking for is there a short-term opportunity where it would be beneficial to put the flaps back? Anyway, I'll leave that with you to consider when you bring us a more detailed report. What are you doing to reduce entry through the bus bays?
Through the chair, so we've identified some of the areas that we are experiencing people coming through the bus bays, and this is where we would work. We deploy our special constables to be able to patrol those areas, in addition to the additional staff that we mentioned at these stations.
Right. Have you started ticketing people coming in the bus bays?
I'd have to get back to you on whether there's been any tickets issued for staff coming, for people coming through the bus bays.
All right, let's do that. Now you told us that you basically can't enforce effectively against youth under 16. You can't issue tickets to them. What percentage of the overall loss is attributable to youth under 16? even approximately?
Through the chair, as part of our study, that was not something we were able to quantify.
Right. Do you have even a qualitative sense? Is it a very large percentage, a very small percentage, of any sense at all?
It was a concern which I had felt that was needed to be raised, but again, unable to quantify its impact.
All right. So you don't have a quantitative impact and we can't effectively enforce it. Is there an action plan relating to fare evasion by youth under 16?
So yes, the action plan is that we have partnerships with the school boards. We already sit at the table with them. And we are working on developing an educational program that would involve our community engagement team going to schools. In addition, we have videos that will be going to those schools too. So it's a combination of our own special constables going into the schools, as well as working on a curriculum specifically around, you know, how to be a good citizen on our bus network.
Right. So as you've all heard me say before, I'm very interested in moving towards free tickets for high school students. When you looked at the possible revenue loss from providing free tickets to high school students, did you take into account the rate of fare evasion and the impossibility of enforcement against youth under 16?
So through the chair, no, I mean, that's part of the work that we're evaluating. I mean, I think, Chair, this list that you have before you requires, in many cases, fair amount of analysis to understand all the elements when you're looking at one versus the other. And so to date, that has not happened.
Okay, but it's clearly relevant to what it would actually, what the actual costs and benefits would be of free tickets, at least for the children under 16. We'll discuss that again when you come back. In the study presentation mentioned that our current bylaw is out of date, was written before Presto was available, and is confusing. I didn't see a bylaw update on the action plan. Are you planning to propose an update of the bylaw, and if so, when?
So as part of the fine structure review and other recommendations, we will be coming back with updated or proposals to amend the bylaw.
And when is that?
So it would be towards the end of this year or into Q1 of 2025.
One of the issues that I know gets frequently raised is the question of enforcement discretion and whether there's racial bias in enforcement discretion. Have you evaluated removing enforcement discretion from the fare inspectors so as to address that risk? Simply require them to approach people randomly, and anybody who hasn't paid gets a ticket. Why is continuing discretion a good idea, given all the complaints that we hear about misuse of discretion?
So the policy that we brought before the board in December and that will come back to the board addresses exactly that. So our training requires that our fare inspectors have to inspect everyone. And that's the reason why I showed the deployment and went through why we've changed things and why we focused a lot of our training on anti-racism training. So the deployment and the way in which we fare inspect, we have to go through the entire streetcar, everyone gets inspected.
Right,
And
but you
that's to
told us
ensure-
that the officer still has discretion whether or not to issue
Yes.
a ticket and which ticket to issue. Why is that a good idea? Shouldn't we eliminate that discretion?
No, the reason why we have that discretion are for several tests. One, when we know someone is underhoused or in mental distress, we will not be issuing a ticket. And so we need to have that discretion. In those cases, It's the job of the fare inspector to perform a wellness check to make sure that those citizens are okay on the system, and in some cases, to call transit control and get the appropriate help to those people that are on the system. And so that's the reason why there's a need for discretion. And in some cases, we have people who are, newcomers to the system. They might be first time that they've might be new to Toronto. And in those cases, we can issue discretion. In all other cases, the fare inspectors are required to issue a ticket or a caution. One of the things that we also shared with you is that the new mobile ticketing enables us to have a history of what's happened. So when someone has been first issued a caution, we can then be able to know if this time they can have a progressive ticket and having a ticket that time. So all of this information is why we can why the fare inspectors does have a level of discretion, but it's identified and outlined in our training.
And you mentioned mobile ticketing as being something that was coming out. How many of what percentage of the inspectors have the mobile ticket device?
I know it's on rotation, so we have a few devices similar to what we're doing with body worn camera, where I know with body worn cameras, we have about 20 devices for each fare inspector. This is a similar rollout where we have, where 20 of our fare inspectors will have the mobile ticketing devices at a time, and it rotates right through to each fare inspector so that they have the appropriate exposure to it.
How long will it take before they all have the device?
So the pilot ends in May.
Well, how long will it take until they all have the device? I mean, you told us about the advantages of the device, but most of them don't have it at any given time. So those advantages happen on a very small percentage of the time. So are you saying there's been no decision yet whether you're rolling them out, or you don't have a schedule yet?
There's no decision right now of when we're going to roll it out. We're going to look at the findings of the pilot, and then we will be able to come back to the board about when the full rollout would occur.
So when you were answering questions from Commissioner Osborne, you gave us the jaw-dropping number that the inspectors are producing 1 ticket a week each. How much does it cost us to have a fare inspector for a week?
I'd have to get back to you on their salaries. I don't have their individual, what the average is.
Okay, do you have a sense what they are? All right, well, please do get back to me. But you said that there was a minimum number of inspections per inspector per week. What's the minimum?
It depends on their shift, because we have 3 shifts, an 8-hour shift, a 10-hour shift, and a 12-hour shift. So the minimum for like a 12-hour shift, I think, is around 300 inspections a day. Given that they do a lot of different tasks, including, as I mentioned, when they do wellness checks and when there are tickets being written, that does take some time. But that's the minimum. That's not a quota.
Right, but the numbers don't match. I mean, you've told us you've got I think a 16% fare evasion ratio. You said you've got 300 inspections happening a day, which presumably means at least over 1,000 a week, and you're only getting 1 ticket. The numbers don't match.
Yes, so there's inspections, and then there's the tickets. So as I mentioned, up until recently, we were encouraging our customers when we found out that they hadn't paid to actually pay their fare, right?
Right, and you told us that half of them did. You said half of them did. Even so, if you found, I mean, if your numbers are right, so if you've got 1,000 inspections a week for round numbers, and 16% of those are evaders, you got 160 evaders, and half of them pay when approached, so that's 80. Why is there only 1 ticket?
So what happens in the system is that while we have 50% will tap and pay, and some we have to write cautions for, and we encourage them, we will write cautions, or, and in some cases, in many cases, people walk away. And we're not able to, you know, we don't use force to keep people on a streetcar. And so in those cases, they will walk away.
So what we've got is a system that is almost always ineffective, it sounds like. That
Through the chair, I'm going to jump right in, because you're right. I'm just going to jump in and let you know that you might not have heard earlier. As of yesterday, the schedule had changed and the direction of staff had changed. It's not tap before tickets. It's about culture change. All our inspectors will have better than 50% more time with the new schedule on vehicles and being seen by customers. So I'm really anxious at the end of this week to get a full tabulation of the first week of it, true inspections and true ticketing and warnings, so that we can report back to you, because you're right, the past is not a good indicator. The extra educating, the giving people an opportunity did not change the culture. It put us in a bad state.
Well, I mean, no wonder. I used to be a prosecutor, and my PhD is in enforcement. And in a system where people have a small risk of detection and a very small list of any consequences, you're going to get a high level of infractions, and the fact that it's likely to increase over time, which is exactly the experience that we have. So what is your expectation of the number of tickets that are going to be produced by an inspector per week under your new system?
So as Rick mentioned, I think this week is going to be a baseline for us to indicate how well we can go going forward. And I think when we come back to the board and report back on how we've been doing, we'll be able to give you an indication of expectations. So definitely, I'm expecting to have fair inspectors produce more than 1 or 2 tickets a week, and likewise more cautions. And we want to be able to see, and we're expecting with the campaigns that we're doing that our customers will know that they are expected to pay.
What are your KPIs? What do you consider an acceptable level, and when are we going to get there?
So the question is acceptable level of tickets?
Acceptable level of
inspection?
fare evasion. We're at an outrageously high level now. It's important to get it down. I don't see targets. I don't see any way of measuring your progress. We need to, you keep talking to us about outputs and not outcomes. I want to know what the outcomes are that you're planning to achieve and how we're going to know whether you're on track.
Through the chair, what I'll say is, when we looked at the industry, we know that fare evasion, and I say this was pre-COVID, to get proof of payment in that 3 to 5% range was considered acceptable, right? Now, we know it's a new world, but we're going to start tracking that. I've asked for Raj to come back, do another one of these, especially on streetcar for us, so we can report back. We don't have the KPIs. You and I talked already. So you and I talked about coming back with actual KPIs that lay out the stats, the data that we're looking at, how we're tracking it, what our targets will be based on what we see. That hasn't yet to be fully fleshed out.
Well, yes, please. And, again, we keep being told things are getting better. We were told that as customer service agents were improving collections at the stations, but then what I heard in the presentation was only marginal. We actually need to see with more granularity, have you identified the biggest problems and what are you doing about them? Well, for example, one of the things that was highlighted in the study was the very high level of fare evasion on streetcars in the back doors late in the day. What are you doing specifically about that?
So maybe I just want to clarify one thing. So the study was done last year, and what we've shown in this presentation is currently what we've been deploying for late last year and into this year. So this is really, everything is new since the study had taken place. With respect to what we're doing with the back door and with the increase, what we're seeing, an increase in fare evasion towards like the end or towards the middle to the end of the day, is this exact deployment, ensuring that we have larger teams that will not just start the inspections at the front of the door, but at the rear doors in addition to also looking at changing the start times of our fare inspectors so that we capture what's happening into the evening. So it's really changing that schedule, changing and ensuring that we have larger teams so that the fare evasion is captured at both ends of the streetcar.
Right, and that would give us a lot more comfort if we had any stats that the ticket inspectors are actually improving ticket paying, which we don't have yet. Have you considered closing or preventing rear door entry late in the day?
So that's on the roadmap here in terms of examining the all-door boarding, and so that's something that we will be looking at, yes. So this,
You're looking at it
everything's,
specifically in terms of times of day?
yes, that would be included as part of the review.
Okay, it didn't say so on the list, but admittedly, this is a very summary list. Listen, I know we're almost out of time for this meeting, and I also have another meeting to go. One last question. You mentioned that when people tap, that revenue goes to the TTC, but if they get a ticket, if the ticket is collected, it doesn't go to the TTC, it goes to the city. Have you formally requested the city to refund ticket revenue to the TTC?
So through the chair, that's also on the list. We have not made that formal request. Part of it at the moment is, tied up in terms of how that revenue is dealt with. One of the things we're looking at to talk to them about is the administrative penalty system as well, and to see if that can come back to the TTC. So as we identify and review our fine structure, we need that fine structure in place and then engaging with them. So that's on our list for about Q4 of this year.
All right. That's all we have time for in any event. I have a motion. Chrisanne, can you put it up, please? Okay, thank you. Does anyone have questions for the mover? Well, hearing none, I'm going to move this motion. All in favor?
In favor?
Okay, I think that concludes this meeting.
I have something I'd like to say, Chair, if I could, just on the comments portion of this.
Of course.
Don't know if I should have done that maybe before we did the motion, but so I also wanted to address the fact that the city takes the fine revenue. It just makes no sense. We've invested millions of dollars in this money that could be directed to other places. That doesn't make any sense. I don't think on any level that we don't keep it. I also think that we need to be very careful in how we communicate the nature of this problem, because it's a gross understatement to refer to it as a $120 million problem, $124 million problem, because this is not a one-time issue. This is unfortunately an annuity, which would make it the gift that keeps on giving. And so it's I don't know how an actuary would describe it, but it's likely got the word billion in it when we are looking at how we describe this problem. So I really think that we should be extremely mindful of what we say and how we say it. And then finally, just, the chair did discuss a number of sort of specific tactics that we, are we looking at this and when and should we and so on. And I think there's obviously, her list wasn't exhaustive. And I'm wondering if we could get even maybe, you've got some handle, admittedly not perfect, on where the problems are, and in many cases, roughly how much money we're talking about. And if we could have some way to plot, like, I don't know, this is maybe getting too specific, but on one side, how much money is at stake here in lost revenue, and on the other side, how hard is it to address this problem? And then the things that are in the outer quadrant, maybe we don't touch because the likelihood of recovery is so low, it makes no sense. That we concentrate our efforts on the ones where obviously it's the easiest to get and the highest reward for the efforts made against that. And then the other one is maybe some idea of the breaking down these issues into some that are more sort of straightforward mechanical fixes, or the layout of how we move passengers through stations or through vehicles. We talked about some with the doors and so on, versus the attitudinal ones, which admittedly is a bit more catching fog. So, okay, that
I do want to thank staff for into this. It's a very, very important problem. We want to see more of it. And I know there were 3 other items that were on the list for us to consider, and that we haven't discussed today. So, Chrisanne, I'm not sure what the best process is. As I discussed with Mr. Leary, my suggestion is that we simply refer those back to staff to bring forward again with more fulsome reports. Do you need a motion to that effect?
Yeah, if you'd like to move that motion, Chair, I will record it. That was a referral.
Yes, well, I move that the other 3 audit items be referred back to staff to report again in more detail.
I second it.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, are we okay to vote? I'm in favor.
In favor?
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Chrisanne, anything else I'm supposed to do now?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. All right. Commissioner Osborne, would you like to move to adjourn?
Yes, I'll move it.
I'll second. All in favor?
In favor?
Thank you very much, everybody. Really appreciate your hard work on this very difficult issue.
Thank you, members.